Good afternoon, everyone. Hope you're doing well. My name is Caroline Player, and on behalf of the Georgia Tech Alumni Association and our Career Services Department, I welcome you to today's Professional Gold webinar program on Becoming a High Potential. For many of you who have joined us for other Professional Gold webinars, you're familiar with our leader. For those of you who may be joining us for the first time, I'd like to introduce you to our speaker, Adrienne Johnston, a Tech Chemistry alumna. Adrienne's passion for forming teams and building careers began here at Georgia Tech when she was part of the founding management team at Starbucks at Technology Square. She honed these interests at VendorMate, rising through the ranks to become Vice President of Operations. After leaving VendorMate, she led user experience for KidsLink, and she is now the Vice President of Operations at Buckhead Investment Partners. Before I turn the program over to Adrienne, just let me mention two things. If you could make sure that you are on mute for the extent of this program, that would be so helpful in controlling background noise. We would like this to be interactive, and I would welcome you to utilize the chat function on the WebEx system to send us questions, comment on prompts that Adrienne gives you, but we do look forward to this being interactive for you, and thank you for joining us today. And at this point, I'm going to turn the program over to Adrienne.
Thank you, Caroline, and it's such a pleasure to be here and to join everyone today. I will just make sure that everybody here is on mute. We had a couple people just join. There we go, and we'll keep an eye on that as we progress through if we hear any background noise. So today what we're going to be talking about is how to become identified as a high potential in your organization. And here's the reality about high potentials. They're the ones who get recognition, who get noticed, who get the first crack at new opportunities that may present themselves in their organizations, whether that's a promotion or a lateral move or special projects. They're going to be the ones who are going to get visibility within a team or within an organization. And so we want to make sure is that for those of you who are trying to optimize your career, make sure that you're positioning yourself for those opportunities, that you know the things that your leadership team is going to be looking for in order to engage individuals in those projects. So we're going to start by talking about what exactly is a high potential and really defining that so we all have clarity on understanding why it's important to your leadership team, and then how to go about actually executing on a plan to become high potential. And then at the end, we will set a few action items, which you'll know is my favorite part. We'll get to that probably around 12:35 to 12:45, and that will be highly interactive, and we can all share with each other what our action plans are based on where we think it's most appropriate, where it's most appropriate and where you need the most opportunity and where you really need to be spending your time, effort, and energy. So we'll go through that process. For those of you who do have to drop off a little bit early, we will be recording the session, and it'll be available on the gtalumni.org Professional Gold page within a few days. So you're welcome to go back and, I'm sorry, I said, yes, Professional Gold. I was getting myself confused with Management Gold for a minute. But yes, it will be available there within a few days, so you're welcome to go back and check it out if you missed it. That is a very important part, that last piece in terms of setting expectations and going ahead and starting some action planning to actually do something to achieve that objective. So let's kick off by defining what high potential really is. So high potential employees exhibit characteristics and outcomes that indicate a 90% likelihood that they will be high performers at the next level. So many of you are probably familiar with the Peter Principle, which says that people are promoted to their highest level of incompetence, meaning you're promoted and promoted and promoted, and at some point you really start to not be able to manage the responsibilities, exercise the judgment, the leadership opportunities, and to maximize your performance at that level, and so where you spend the rest of your career, in a place where you're not actually really successful. Now, on the flip side, high potential employees are looked at as being really highly likely to perform at the next level and to continue to excel. And there are a series of characteristics that really define those individuals, which we'll get into in the section where we talk about how do we go about becoming high potentials and making sure that we're recognized that way by our managers, by leaders in our organization, and even just by our teammates. So much of our leadership and our ability to be classified as a high potential is going to come from our peers, the way they talk about us, the way they think about us, the way they interact with us. So making sure that we're really positioning ourselves appropriately is going to be important. So in terms of the outcomes of becoming a high potential, first and foremost, individuals who are characterized as high potentials are going to be far more likely to see higher levels of success. And that's partly based on the attributes that define them, being highly ambitious, constantly striving to learn, being excellent team players. Those elements are going to contribute to their success. But additionally, because they are actually exhibiting those, other people are going to see them as being really valuable to the organization, and so they're going to continue to give them more responsibility. And so it's a little bit of a cycle there of having the right skills and attributes, getting more opportunities, continuing to excel, being recognized as excelling, getting more opportunities, and kind of continuing to go through that cycle and those iterations of improvement. And so that's really important when you talk about, how do you optimize your career? It's how do you make sure that you're setting yourself up for that success? And again, it's all about growth. As you are given new opportunities, you stretch a little bit, you learn new skills, you continue to gain more knowledge and insight. And if you can continue to excel in every role and with every opportunity and project, that cycle continues to fulfill itself. And that is ultimately going to get you to career optimization, where you're as effective as you can possibly be in your role, you're able to achieve success, to get the best out of those around you, and continue to be leaders and to excel. So this is really going to be the meat of our presentation here. It's talking about how do we really go about becoming a high potential. There are 5 characteristics that are commonly associated with individuals who are high potentials. And we're going to cover each of those, what do they mean, and then how do we as individuals go about making sure that we're actually taking action and steps that are going to demonstrate to those around us that we exhibit those that we exhibit those characteristics. So first and foremost, high potentials know their industry and they know their business. So they don't take for granted that, whatever they're provided in their existing training or when they're onboarded into a new organization or team is all there is to know. They're constantly growing, learning, trying to put all the pieces of the puzzle together, and they typically just know more and are more engaged. They're seeking additional knowledge, and they're understanding the strategies in their particular industry or business, and they understand how to apply those in execution. So beyond the conceptual, I've worked with many people who understand the concept and the strategies of how you go about executing, but when the rubber meets the road, can never really do it. And those individuals tend not to be classified as high potentials because while they understand the strategies and they understand what should be done, they can't actually do it. So that execution piece is going to be really important. How do you take something from concept to reality? That's what drives the business forward ultimately. So for those of you who are saying, how do I get more industry or business knowledge? There are a couple places you can start. First of all, what are common publications in your particular field of study or industry? And subscribe to those. And I would say you're probably going to want to do this somewhat sparingly at first, because if not, you're going to end up like me, and you're going to wake up every morning to 10 different publications on wealth management. And frankly, it's not all that thrilling at 7 a.m. to wake up to. So you may want to start a little slow, because at some point somebody's going to sell your email address and you're going to end up on all the lists you can possibly imagine. But really be sparing and choosing, and if you end up finding that something just isn't quite appropriate, or the publication and content itself isn't meaningful to you, it's not interesting or appropriate, then you can certainly unsubscribe to those. But I find subscribing to those newsletters and things are really, really helpful. Even from a compliance standpoint, for a registered investment advisor, I am subscribed to SEC updates, so when they have no action letters, I get emails about that, so I can quickly go through and peruse those without having to go scour the website or remember all that content is pushed to me. So that's really valuable for me. I also recommend going to networking sessions, and it's not just about the engagement with other networkers, which is actually my least favorite part typically. I love to have friends and relationships, but making them is always difficult for me. Probably not all that shocking for you, fellow alumni here. But, it's really important that we go to those sessions, and you're going to get so much content and information if you're in your particular business or industry, and you'll find that it's giving you visibility to information, concepts, thoughts of people that you may not have had access to otherwise. We're in the process of reevaluating our end user support vendor internally, and that has led to a series of conversations with other registered investment advisory firms. And while I had them on the phone, we were talking about the vendor, it's other elements of how they manage their compliance program. How are they handling, maintaining full control of their devices and everything with now all the mobility that we have with laptops and people bringing their own devices to work. And you really get great and in-depth, real insight from other individuals. And so anytime you have that opportunity, you should absolutely ask. People want to share and they absolutely want to help. Another thing that you can do is ask your manager, ask your colleagues, other leaders in your organization. I was trying to decide, which I think I've shared with you all before, whether or not to pursue my CFP now that I find myself in the wealth management industry. And based on feedback from my colleagues and our leadership team, have decided not to pursue it because they all felt that it would be entirely too in-depth and not really help me do my job. And while it would be very informational, it's not practical from a cost or a time perspective. There were other things and other certifications that I may want to pursue instead. So, don't be afraid if you have a grand idea to make sure you run it by someone else in order to make sure that it's going to be appropriate and meaningful for you. Next, high potentials are usually very highly respected, not just among the leadership team, but among their peers as well. These are the people who are recommended for project teams, who are spoken highly of even when they're not in a room. They are the person that people are always coming by their office trying to get advice or thoughts from them. They're helpful, they're thoughtful, and overall people really truly respect them. And so as you're going through the process of saying, am I respected by my colleagues and by my team? Do other people see me as a leader? Am I inherently just that person? A great opportunity to realize is, if you were to get promoted, would your peers all be happy for you and think that it was deserved, or would they feel like they were slighted? And, the second can, them feeling slighted can happen. We all have a little bit of a tendency to do that. But the reality is that for most people I've seen who've been really highly respected by their team, there isn't a lot of backlash from their promotion or their ability to get other projects and opportunities because other people realize how deserving they are of them. So when it comes to being respected by your team, you want to make sure that you're the one stepping up. If people are more likely to be frustrated, if they're like, Adrienne is so incompetent, but she keeps getting promoted, that's not going to bode well for you. On the other side, if you're the one who is always offering to help in cross-functional team projects, or always speaking up with not just problems, but solutions to those problems, and offering to take the lead on them, people are going to respect you. They're going to appreciate your hard work, your dedication, and your willingness to help. You're also going to want to make sure that you're always open and receptive to the feedback of others. We were actually going through this at work. Some colleagues have felt, and it's very split, and it probably depends on which team you're on and the things you're asking for, but we were having discussion in our operations meeting recently that a few members of our team felt like after we leave our operations meetings that things don't happen. And as you kind of delve deeper into it, what you found out was that people felt like the technology aspects of things that we said we were going to do weren't actually happening. And that's largely because they don't have a realistic expectation of how difficult it can be to implement technology solutions, how complex systems are, and refining them. And the whole process just takes time. Versus usually with process and operational things, it doesn't take as long to implement. So making sure that people understand that. But my point on being open and receptive was my gut reaction when I first heard that was, how can anybody feel that way? That's so unrealistic. We've done so much and we've achieved all these things, and it was very personal, and I found myself getting defensive. But I was really glad that one of my colleagues had brought it up so that we could talk about it in our operations meeting and really delve into it. And that was not me at my best to immediately get defensive, but sometimes when I'm tired, that happens, and we all do. But making sure that you can be open, and even if you find yourself getting defensive, saying, you know what, I want to understand so that I can make sure that people do feel like they can come talk to you and they do respect you, and that they're willing to voice those concerns, and then you can be the one to help resolve them, is a huge element of gaining the respect of your colleagues and peers and being recognized as a high potential. Another thing you're going to want to do is you're going to want to have meaningful relationships with your colleagues. And we talked about this in the context of many different situations over the course of Professional Gold this year. But if you have a relationship with somebody and things go wrong, they're going to be far more willing to step up to defend you, to help resolve issues. A colleague and I were laughing the other day. I owed him something and he owed me something, and we were laughing about how we were both just we both realized the constraints that we had in terms of time and how to resolve that, versus that particular colleague could have very easily gone to our boss and said, hey, Adrienne hasn't done this thing that she said she was going to do. And I guess I could have done the same, but that really wouldn't serve either of us well, and doesn't save us time, because then ultimately it's more conversation. So really realizing, how do you develop those personal one-on-one relationships with members of your team so that they understand the challenges and constraints you're under, they're offering to help, to take things off your plate, and that you can kind of continue to be as efficient as possible. And ultimately, having those relationships is why they're going to respect you, because they're going to know you. They're going to understand, again, those challenges and constraints. And when the opportunity presents itself and you're given an opportunity, they're going to understand that. And they're going to want that for you because they have that relationship with you. They know more about you. And you're having those really open, honest dialogues with them. Okay, so another thing, and this characteristic of ambitious is somewhat, I think, a little bit disarming for some of us because it feels so aggressive. But there's nothing wrong with ambition. There's nothing wrong with wanting to achieve more. And what you have to make sure is that you're keeping your execution in line with those ambitions, and that you're not being blinded by the ambitions, and consequently, I should be the one who's promoted, or I should be the one who's getting this, that, or the other. That ambition isn't accidentally manifesting itself as entitlement, because I want it, I should have it kind of mentality. So really think about, ambition as displaying your commitment to your organization, to your product, to your team, to be better, to be the best. And it's all about how do you achieve and attain that, than it is about expecting that it should come because you're part of it. These individuals who are characterized as ambitious are also the first ones to jump at opportunities. They understand their limitations and their constraints, but again, that does not keep them from saying, I want to do more. They figure out how to get more done. And they also are really, really good about asking for and being receptive to feedback. One point I will note here on this particular piece about feedback is, when you ask for it, you're going to want to make sure that you are prepared for honest feedback. And a lot of times that feedback is counter to the way we perceive ourselves, and that can create a little bit of conflict between the way you perceive yourself and the way others perceive yourself, and it ends up in a situation where you can be a little bit defensive and say, I'm not that way. Just because that's not how you perceive it doesn't mean that's not how it is perceived. And since perception is reality, as we all know, it's really important to just take that into account and say, you know what, someone else thinks, I may have told you guys this story last time, but I had a colleague once who said, you know what, you are always late to meetings. And it is so frustrating. It makes the rest of us feel like you don't appreciate our time. I said, it's so funny because I feel like I'm going back-to-back meetings and other people are late that cause me to be late to my next meeting. And she said, you just got to leave. If they're late, then it's their responsibility and not yours. And I said, that was practical reality. But again, in that moment, I realized how I was feeling about it was very different than how it was perceived by others. And we have to make sure that we're recognizing that, appreciating it, and then making adjustments accordingly. If you're getting a lot of feedback from individuals and then you don't do anything with it, what's the point? What's the point in asking for it, and what's their point in going out on a limb and giving it to you and really being honest and transparent? So making sure that you, like an ambitious person, is really going to internalize that and say, I want to be better. Today, tomorrow, every day I want to strive to be better, and this is how I'm going to go about doing it, is to get this feedback, internalize it, and figure out what changes I make. And it's not overnight. My boss just told me the other day, this is quite amazing, that I very frequently, as a matter of fact, every time I leave a room, ask anybody if there's anything I can do for them. Let's just go ahead and blame that on my days at Starbucks. But the reality is that apparently my colleagues have perceived this as I am their caretaker. And in some contexts, believe that I am simply there to get them beverages, which they never anyone ever asked me for, but that's the connotation that people have associated with that. And darn, if it's not the hardest thing in the world to leave a room now that I realize that I say it, and figure out how to end and leave. And I don't know how to walk out and just leave. It's the strangest thing. And it's one of the, I didn't realize that I was putting myself in the back seat and making myself subservient to others. I just thought I was being nice, which is very much who I am naturally. So, it's really important that we realize that those changes don't happen overnight and they're going to be uncomfortable, but even that self-awareness of, I'm late to a meeting and acknowledging with others is a great first step. So, on the way to very effectively developing your ambition, you may want to start by just thinking about when somebody asks you for an opportunity, instead of saying, I've never done that before, I'm not really sure, saying, yes, I'd love the opportunity to take on this challenge. Just so that we're clear, I have not done X, Y, and Z, and I may need some support and assistance, but I'll make sure that I've surfaced that in an appropriate and timely manner as we go through this process. Or if you wouldn't mind, kind of sitting through these first couple of meetings until I get my feet wet, that would really help to make sure that I don't miss anything. Say yes, say I absolutely want that opportunity, and here are the things I'm going to need help with. People absolutely want you to do that, and they want to help you, and they want to know that you're on your way towards growing and developing, and they're going to be willing to assist. The next thing you can do is to, again, ask others for input on where they see you having opportunities for development, other things they need from you, and just being really open and transparent about that. The way you see it, your perspective, why you hadn't thought of something a certain way, and then circle back with them. I've spent a couple of days thinking about it, and I can completely see and appreciate your point, and I'm going to try to resolve it by doing these things. And I literally left a meeting yesterday without offering beverage service and said to one of my colleagues, please keep me honest. If you feel like we're falling, kind of getting off the rails on this particular project, then please let me know. This was one of the colleagues who felt like our technology was progressing a little slowly. Say it, it's okay, let's at least talk about why these things are happening so you understand from a business perspective the constraints that we have. And to make sure, when you bring it up, then we sit down and we have another discussion of, are we accidentally prioritizing the wrong things, or is it the right decision for the business? But it's always great to have those checkpoints along the way, both at an individual and team level. Now, the fourth attribute of high potentials is they're team players. They're not, trying to put themselves at the top of the ladder. I once worked with someone who, for a multitude of reasons, was incapable of performing on a team. She would literally call me up and she'd say, they're all over here talking instead of working. It's the day after Thanksgiving. Please go in there and talk to them about their Thanksgiving vacations. Why are we even having this discussion? And she was always so busy trying to push everybody else down the ladder so that she would be higher on it instead of climbing the ladder and bring everybody else with her. That she really alienated herself on the team as an individual, and she certainly alienated me because it was so childlike. Team players, they know the value of the team. They understand their strengths relative to everyone else's. They know that they're not the best proofreader and they're going to need somebody to check this work when they're done. And they realize the people who are good at that and who can help make the whole team better. They realize that there are going to be challenges and problems, and they're going to provide coverage for other people, and other people at some point are going to provide coverage for them. And they, in many respects, pay it forward without worrying about it, as long as they know that their team has their back. And having a good, strong team can be difficult, and I know we've talked about it with this group before. people whose bosses will openly acknowledge that other members of their team aren't pulling their weight, but then not do anything about it. And that's difficult to address, and all you can try and do is understand where those gaps are, try and change and pull people along where you can, and then just appreciate where you can't, and make sure that you're not investing massive amounts of time, effort, and energy there, except for to make sure that the team is better off. And sometimes that's going to mean that, you know, if there's somebody who's falling down and the boss isn't addressing it, that you know that that's going to be an issue and you're providing coverage. There have been many, many times in my career where that was the case. And it was always appreciated, recognized, and valued. And I truly believe that that is part of what allowed me to be recognized as a high potential and to get opportunities that other people didn't have. Because at the end of the day, it got done and I made sure it was taken care of. Team players address challenges professionally and head on. They don't run down, you know, to somebody else's office to complain about someone. They go into Susie's office and say, Susie, it's really challenging for me that we keep having this issue. What can I do to help? What are the process improvements we need to make? And the next time something, you know, a project or something's coming up, they're saying, okay, Susie, remember last time we talked about this. They get in front of it. They're proactive. They make sure that they're bringing out the best on their teams. And ultimately, that is leadership. And that is what people are looking for in high potentials. These individuals also understand the value of consensus building in an effective way. I recently saw someone building consensus by sending out emails and asking for email feedback, which isn't necessarily the most effective way. You really kind of want to get people in a group and talk through challenges and opportunities. Have a takeaway, go back, assess, understand, and then come back with what are realistic expectations and make sure that your team members understand that. At the end of the day, what you don't want to do is set unrealistic expectations where you accidentally underdeliver, and you want to make sure that people all feel bought in, that they feel like their opinions had an opportunity to be heard, and that you're circling back with them so that they understand that just because that was their opinion didn't make it the right decision for the business. And the strategy and the thought process behind all of that and how you continue to grow the team and move it forward. So for those of you who are thinking, I could really be a better team player, how do I do that? One of the challenges that I consistently see in team environments is that we have a tendency to focus on what other people don't do well instead of what they actually do well. The thing that they bring to the team that no one else does. We have one of our accountants, and you wouldn't expect this being a numbers person, is a savant when it comes to proofreading. And she sees things that the rest of us all miss. And it's probably her detail orientation, being an accountant. It's in no way appropriate or specific for her role, but she is now our designated proofreader. And so before any communication goes out to clients, she's the one who proofreads it. She proofreads it. So, you know, we know that that's a strength of hers, and even though it's not in her specific role, that makes the team better. She catches things the rest of us don't even see. So when figuring out that, you can kind of look across teams, and she's willing to do it because it makes all of us better. So think about things that you're really good at, but then think about the things that other people are better than you at, and how do you bring all of that together as one cohesive unit in order to provide each other double checks. And you know, if you're not the best public speaker and there's another member of the team, maybe the other member of the team is the one leading the meetings. They get people excited. Maybe you take the notes and do the follow-ups because they're not as good at that aspect. How do you build a team that can do more than any one of you can do as an individual? The other thing that you're going to want to make sure you're doing is what's right for the team, regardless if it's comfortable for you or in your own best interest. And sometimes it's really difficult to put that in perspective. And I learned this very early on in my career. One of my my bosses would always say, we always take care of individual contributors, raises, promotions, recognition before we ever take care of ours as managers. And I really, really love that. If your team isn't at market, then you don't get to market. And, you know, it's a practical reality that certainly has to be balanced, but that kind of perspective where your team comes before you, your comfort, your, there are times our receptionist will say, and we have a relatively small team of 22 people, our receptionist will say, I really would love to take Friday afternoon off, but I know somebody has to be here to answer the phones. So we coordinate with the rest of the team to see who's going to be available that afternoon in the office and available to answer phones. And then we make sure that we stay put so that we can provide that coverage for the benefit of our clients, and that we all have those proper expectations. But not because she's never allowed to take a vacation day or get sick, because somebody has to answer the phones. You know, how do you balance all those things and make sure that other people can have what they need as well? Now, the last characteristic of high potentials is the ability to take calculated risks. For those of you who have seen rolling around on LinkedIn and Facebook, Colin Powell did a speech a couple of years ago, and he was talking about the attributes of great leaders. And he said one of them is taking these calculated risks. And he said that a great leader is going to assess a situation and make a decision based on a 40 to 70% probability that they're making the right decision. Not 100%. 40 to 70% was the range in which he felt people should make decisions. And he said, because in the time it takes you to get to 70 to 80% or 70 to 100%, you're going to spend so much time on the data and analyzing the problem in all the different situations that what will inevitably happen is the situation will change. So now you're making a bad decision based on old data, or potentially a bad decision. And so you had to really, find every bit of intuitiveness that you have in you, quickly assess the situation, and come up with a 40 to 70% probability that you were going to be right, that you were moving quickly enough to market with an idea when it was still valid, that you were making a decision based on relatively new data, and that they really jump at those opportunities. And they do them in a very thoughtful way. So for those of you who are not risk takers, one of the things that you can do is just start with something that's not too risky to get comfortable. I'll find myself sometimes sending an email to my boss to say, what do you think about this, that, or the other? When the reality is, and I'll find myself and I'll actually close it out and say, I'm just going to do that because I think that's the right decision and it's not worth bothering her over. And she'll let me know if it was the wrong decision or if she disagreed. So really feeling empowered to make those smaller decisions can be a great step in that direction. Again, I'm not changing business strategy or anything like that in those little decisions. And so, well, why do I need to engage her over whether or not this is the appropriate client communication or something of that nature? So it's really important to think through that. And the other thing is to realize is that most of our managers, and 99% is a number throughout there, but the majority of our managers are going to rather that we try, fail, and learn than to never try it at all. They don't want us to be afraid. And I think there are certain situations, right? They're not going to want you to make some big business-altering mistake. And so when the stakes are that high, we have to keep that in mind. But they don't want us to never try anything, to never get out of our comfort zone, to just be steady Eddies, just continuing to operate at the status quo. They want us to stretch. They want us to grow. They want us to provide more and more support to them and to continue to be more and more valuable. So it's really important that we stop and assess that and are really thoughtful about it. And even some of those impediments that we have in ourselves of, oh, I might get in trouble if I do that. Are you really going to get in trouble? And again, I will say this for the majority of managers. I'm sure there is at least one person on this call who has the less than effective manager who likes to control every little thing. And if that's the case, then you may be want to look for a new manager if that's an option, or to learn how to deal with it. And then you're probably not going to want to step outside of that box. So you definitely want to use caution in this approach. But most of you know if you have a manager who would rather you step up than to never try anything at all. So think about what those things are that you can start taking more leadership and ownership over. And then, as opposed to asking a question like, I'm going to do this, what do you think, or what would you recommend? Saying, this is what I plan to do. Do you have any suggestions or concerns? And that really puts you in a leadership position of saying, I've got this, but you let me know if you think I don't have it. And that's a great way to position yourself. Now, that was all 5 attributes of being a high potential. So what we will do next is do a little bit of action planning. So for those of you who have closed your chat window, up in the top right-hand corner of your screen, there will be a little downward-facing arrow that you can click on. And that will expand your panel over on the right-hand side of your screen. And under that, there is another option for chat. So if that window is closed, you can also expand it. And you can send a message straight to Caroline and myself. And we will read them out anonymously to the rest of the group. But This section is all about how do we go about setting an action plan. At this point, you guys have all invested about 35 minutes in this session and really clearly have an interest in how do you become a high potential. And so based on these potential action items that we've kind of set out, where do you see yourself having areas of opportunity? And what's one step you want to take in the next couple of weeks in order to actually move forward in becoming a high potential? Because what we know and studies show is that if you don't take action within about 21 days of a session like this, you'll never do anything with it. It'll be information, but you won't have practically applied it. And that's the single most important part of becoming a high potential is the execution. So for those of you who would like to share that with us, in your chat window, you can tell us what is one action item that you want to take to become a high potential. And while the rest of you are putting in your answers, we do have a question. Someone says, where do you draw the line between saying yes and being taken advantage of, managing time and priorities? That's a tricky question. I will say it's obviously something I struggle with myself. Having come from a service organization where part of your responsibility was to make sure that people were happy and taken care of. I did once, I can't remember exactly where the source was, but their suggestion was to say yes and, which I find to be very unintuitive. So yes, I will get you a coffee and next time you can do it yourself kind of thing. I think it's very unintuitive. Coffee is probably a very bad example. Do you have a specific example, Daniel, that you would mind sharing? That might help us get a little bit more context around it. But I definitely think that, you know, one of the things that you're going to want to get comfortable with is saying no. Unfortunately, I don't have time for that. I had a couple of people ask me for things this morning, and I just didn't have time. And so I responded to an email and said, one, I'm probably actually not the best person to help you with this. And two, this other person is going to be available today and has a much better subject matter knowledge. So kind of positioning it as I'm going to help you take care of your problem, but I can't actually be the one to do it. And unless it's actually your responsibility. So Daniel, if you can provide more context, I would be happy to hopefully give a more detailed answer. Someone else says, I want to learn more about my industry, some of the newer technology and products we offer. I think that's really important and a great activity and exercise is that competitive analysis in addition to what you're doing in your own organization. It can be really difficult to take the time to do that, and so many times we go, yeah, I know it, yeah, I know it. But that's at a really high level, and when you really start to get down into it, you know, what are your clients' needs? If you've ever done client data or surveys, you can ask for copies of that data to really truly understand it, and it just helps you shape where your company is, the services that you're providing, or what you're hoping to do. Did anyone else have any action items that they wanted to share with the group? We'll give it just a couple more minutes. And Daniel, if you have on your question, if you have more specifics that you'd rather not share with the group, you're welcome to email me or Caroline, and we'd be happy to help provide you a little bit more context. I'm sorry to be so vague, but I want to make sure that it's you saying, you know, no to coffee or something lower priority and not, you know, no, I'm not going to do my job today, which I'm sure is not the case, but to give you a little bit more context on how to most appropriately handle that. All right, everyone, thank you so much for joining us. And next week, we are going to be covering presentation skills, which is going to, the context of it is going to be in the sense of preparing a presentation and delivering a presentation, and how do you really prepare to do that effectively. What I love about that presentation is so much of the skills that we talk about in the presentation are things that you can use in meetings when you're debating a point, or in one-on-one meetings with your manager to really position your content, your ideas, your thoughts in a way that's really meaningful and most likely going to be received well by the recipient. So we welcome you to join us for that next month. You're welcome to go ahead and register on the Professional Gold page, and we will talk to you all then. Thank you again for your time today. And again, if you have any questions, feel free to point them to me or Caroline. Thank you all.